everyone, I am here just talking to you something totally not witchy and not tarot based, but just kind of about music that I listen to. I guess this is kind of spiritual because it involves, sometimes people judge you for the kind of music that you listen to and view some things as more or less spiritual than others, which I think is really weird, but people do this. So anyway, I was going to show you my trusty guitar. I've had this since I think 97, so oh god, this is like 20 years ago I bought this guitar. Oh my god. So it's just like a Ibanez G10. I was going to show you the headstock there, but whatever. So I've been playing this on and off. Like I said, I've been playing guitar since I was like 16 or whatever, on and off, and I've been in a couple of different bands, and there's been times in my life where I kind of put it down a bit, but I've always picked it up. And lately I've been picking it up a lot again, which I'm really happy about, and I really enjoy playing it. I just like making noise. I wouldn't say I'm like terribly the most proficient player, but I do enjoy it, and I do like it, and it's fun to make noise. So anyway, I thought I would show you my baby here. All right, put her down there. There you go. Don't fall. There we go. So yeah, you can probably judge what kind of music I like by the background. I grew up in the late 80s, like I was a teenager in the late 80s and the early 90s. So I grew up listening to a lot of like metal music and hard rock music. Back then they called all sorts of hard rock metal, like really, like Poison was metal back then. Although these days, I don't know if they would even classify as that, but whatever. But I listened to like, you know, there's a lot of hair metal, and then I listened to harder stuff too, like I listened to, you know, like Iron Maiden and Metallica and Judas Priest and all that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of music that I grew up liking and I really, really love. But I did have somebody once say to me that they didn't think that that kind of music was very spiritual, and that as a light worker I shouldn't be listening to that kind of music, and that it has of a lower vibration. Now I thought about this, and I think that everyone's different. Music is like a really personal thing. To me, it's like spirituality or sexuality. It's a very personal thing, and we all have our own personal taste. And what resonates for one person doesn't necessarily resonate for someone else. And that is not a good or bad thing. It's just different. It's kind of like the color blue isn't better than the color green or the color red. They're just different. Like my sister loves country music so much. Like she loves country music. I can't stand country music. It's not my thing. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be anyone else's thing though. It's for them and it's not for me, and that's totally okay with. I'm totally okay with that. Like it's fine. Same with rap music. I don't like rap music, but that's okay. It's not for me. That's all that means. And I think it's the same way with things like saying things like classical music or new age music is of a higher vibration. Well, that doesn't make it better. It just makes it different. And sometimes we want something that, you know, like when I'm meditating, I'm not listening to like Metallica. When I'm meditating, I am listening to something new agey, because I find that it does help me meditate. But when I want to be grounded or I want to feel energized, then I'm more likely to listen to something like AC/DC or GNR or whatever, because that's what energizes me and that's what makes me feel more grounded. So it really depends. And I don't think you can judge people based on, you know, the kind of music that they like, because we all like different things. And I think that it also shows a certain amount of judgment that kind of exists a bit in the new age community, I have to say. And certainly I'm not saying everybody's judgmental, because that's fine. And I mean, I've experienced this in Christianity as well. You know, when I was a teenager, I went to a Catholic school and my parents were very strict. And to them, that kind of music was like the devil's music. And it was like, you were not supposed to listen to that. And that was like it was like the devil was talking to you. Like I remember when I was like 16, I came home once and my dad had thrown away, like I had like tons of like cassette tapes, because it's, you know, it's the 80s. Cassette tapes, and I had posters, I had all this stuff, because, you know, I love that stuff. And one day I came home and it was all thrown away, because he believed it was like the devil's music. So, which was like devastating for me. And I would never do that to a child. But anyway, it's so there's that judgment there, but then to go into kind of like the New Age community and experience some of the same judgment, maybe not quite on the same level, but it does have the same tone to it. So instead of saying, well, it's the devil's music, what they say is like, oh, that's low vibration, that's negative energy. And that's pretty much almost saying the same thing. And it just shows like how much that kind of thinking has had an influence on New Age thinking. They're just saying it in a different way, which I think is really bizarre, especially for people who often try to present themselves as open-minded. They're not always open-minded. And I mean, I think we're all guilty of this to a certain degree. And I'm not just picking on the New Age community, because I think that, you know, the kind of thing like judging others can happen in any community over really anything. But I do see a similarity there between like the hardcore Christians and the New Age, and that they said the same thing, but they just used a different language for it, which was sort of funny to me. And it also shows that there's still this judgment on the body being lower than the spirit, because if you listen, there's kind of like almost two sort of distinct elements in metal, and I'm using the word metal very broadly. You can use hard rock, whatever you want. There's kind of like party metal, what I call party metal, where it's like, you know, sex, drugs, rock and roll. And then you've got stuff that's very socially critical. You know, like if you listen to especially older, you know, Metallica or Megadeth or Iron Maiden, it's very critical about authority and things like war, and it makes like very interesting social commentaries on things. And those are both things that are threatening to authority. And there's crossovers, like there's people who do kind of party stuff, but they'll also make a social commentary, and vice versa. But it has more to do with like the physical, and it has more to do with pointing out issues, and it's not always, you know, happy, love and light type stuff, which is I think why also New Age doesn't like it either. Because it views those things as bad. It doesn't want to talk about often negative things. It says, oh no, you got to be positive all the time. And I agree, you know, you should generally be positive, but that doesn't mean you should stick your head in the sand either and pretend that problems don't exist. And good art comforts the disturbed and disturbs the comforted. One of art's jobs is to speak truth to power. And I think that that makes people uncomfortable. And I think in the New Age community, there can sometimes be this desire to not make those criticisms of society, even though those things are there, or not to talk about things like sex or the body, because there's this belief that you should be sort of above those things. And I think that has been strongly influenced by Christianity, because many of these same ideas come out of there. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I just have been thinking a lot about it lately, because I did have somebody, like I said, I had somebody say that to me, and it was somebody I respect, and I'm not saying I don't, their teachings are still great and valid, but that was one area where I said, I don't know, I've heard that song and dance before, but it just was packaged differently in my life, and I don't agree with it. And I certainly, the same thing, like if you can be like a spiritual person and love gangster rap, like there's nothing wrong with that. Or you can be a spiritual person and, you know, maybe you love disco music, or you love, like, you know, dance music, or things, you know, or boy bands, or whatever it is. That is not a judgment on how spiritual you are, because I've also heard people criticize people for listening to things like dance music and boy bands, saying they're frivolous and, oh, that's just, you know, it's meaningless and all that stuff. Well, maybe it means something to them and you don't know that, or maybe it helps to lift them out of a bad mood that they're in, and it helps them to be positive and helps them to go about their day with a light heart. You don't get to judge that as being more or less spiritual than somebody else, because it's a really personal thing, and I think that you shouldn't be judged for that kind of stuff. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Also, what kind of music do you listen to? What do you like? What makes you feel better? Put it in the comments below. I'd love to hear. Like and subscribe. Talk to you next time.